Last Thursday, I went to a really, really fascinating exhibit, and I wanted to tell you Jewish moms all about it. It was an exhibit about King Herod at the Israel Museum, and it was about basically about Herod's life and about his various building projects. He ruled in Israel for 33 years, about 2,000 years ago, and he's famous for the amount of building that he did here. He built he built various palaces for himself. He built in Jericho alone. He built 3 winter palaces. He built the fortress at Masada, and he built like a hippodrome and a fortress in Caesarea, and all over Israel he was building and building. Like it was almost, I think it was unprecedented, the amount of building that he did around here. And his biggest building project was actually the temple. He rebuilt the Beit HaMikdash, Zeo. But the thing, he didn't really rebuild the Beit HaMikdash because he was this very holy tzaddik kind of person. He rebuilt the Holy Temple because he wanted to sort of get on the good side of his Jewish citizens. Who weren't especially fond of him. But Herod was actually a really, really loathsome kind of person. He was not a very lovable guy. This person, Herod, he killed, he murdered many members of his family. He became, especially towards the end of his life, he was very, very paranoid that people were trying to take over power from him. So he murdered 3 of his sons. He murdered his wife Miriam. He murdered his mother-in-law. He murdered his wife's, or his murdered wife's brother. He murdered the wife's grandfather. He murdered many rabbis and the Hashmonaim. He was really, really a terrible person. So basically, at this exhibit, you get to see like all these buildings that he's building. Like he's building so many different. He had so many different building projects, and they said in the exhibit that the point of all these building projects was that Herod, especially, he lived into the age of 69. And he knew, he reached 60, 61, 62, that he knew that he was going to die at one point pretty soon. So all these building projects were his way to achieve. Well, what the curator said was like this was his way of achieving immortality. That he was going to live forever through his building projects. But I had sort of like a powerful sort of like, let's say, like an aha moment at the exhibit. In 2007, so there was a professor named Ehud Netzer, a Hebrew University professor, who spent decades, over 30 years, looking for Herod's tomb. And he finally found it in 2007. Amazing. So he found it, and this exhibit, if you can go see it, it's an amazing exhibit at the Israel Museum. So they reconstructed his tomb, and it's just wild. This huge whole like fortress and palace, and this he had like a swimming pool by the palace. Next to his tomb, and they would go swimming there, and it was such a huge place in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the Judean desert, near Tekoa actually, in the Herodian. So you could actually even go boating there. It was such a huge, like, artificial pool that he made there, and he built this magnificent tomb for himself, and the sarcophagus. Sarcophagus is like sort of a stone coffin, let's say, but very elaborate. And he built this huge, like, very regal sarcophagus and tomb for himself, where he was buried. The thing is, so I'm at the exhibit, and you can actually walk into this tomb and stand next to what was his sarcophagus, and it's pretty wild because it's actually not so big. It's like a small sarcophagus, a small stone box, and I was sort of standing there and just thinking, there's nothing left. Zell, like, this is it. Like, he's in this box. He's on the box in the exhibit, but like that, when he was put in that box, that was the end. This is a person with no good deeds. He was a person who any good deeds that he did were way, way, way overshadowed by the terrible. He was just like this terrible murderer, loathsome lowlife of a murderer person. He was the worst. Okay. And so, and his life ended, and that was it. Like, he's just put in that stone box. There's nothing left of him. Like, even most of his building projects, like, they were basically destroyed over time. There's nothing left of him. Okay, so so I was reminded of a very, very different kind of human being than Herod. Maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, my rabbinite, her mother passed away. This woman, her name was Freda Eisenman, and I knew her quite well. She died when she was in her late 80s, and she was a person who was just, she would walk into a room. She was like a very small person, very like little short woman, petite, let's say. But she'd walk into a room and she had like a smile she'd smile and positive energy that just like filled up a room. She just had such a positive, glowing personality, and she was a woman who just was really, really dedicated to doing good deeds. She in the last decade of her life, after she retired, then she volunteered. She volunteered at the Israel rape crisis hotline, and she was it was difficult work, working on the hotline and being on the hotline for women who Shaloneda had been raped, and she was that kind of person. She was a person who was always doing good deeds and just lighting up people's lives. And I remember it was a very powerful thing for me to see this woman in her like whatever, being already prepared for burial and being lowered into the ground. And she was so little. So little. I guess almost like the sarcophagus was also so little. It's sort of weird when you see like a person who's dead, or so you see like sort of a coffin or like a dead person, prepared for burial. It's so small. Like on a physical level, it's so small. But I was just thinking, like, it just seemed like that. I just felt like this woman, even though her body was so small, she left behind a spiritual mountain. So much goodness this woman had left behind, and it just really got to me, like, what a person leaves behind. Like the spiritual good deeds, all the goodness and all the smiles and all the efforts to help people, which this woman left behind. It's like what's left, it's what's left behind in the world. So all of this, it reminds me, we're coming up to Succot. And recently I heard a beautiful phrase that I don't remember where I read this, but someone was giving advice about a good life, and this person was saying that the most important thing to remember to live a good life is and it's sort of like a pun, a play on the prayer for rain that we say in our prayer, that we say when we're davening, Mashiv Haruach Hamorid Hageshem. So Mashiv Haruach Hamorid Hageshem actually means like literally it means let the wind blow and bring down the rain. But this person did like a play on this phrase and said Mashiv Haruach. Ruach means spirit. So bring up spirit. May there be more. He said the secret to a good life is more spirit, Mashiv Haruach, and more Hageshem. Bring down the physical. That there be more spiritual and less physical. Okay, and I think Sukkot really represents that. Sukkot, we move into like these little huts, and I'm really excited. We're building our little sukkah tomorrow on our street, and the Arizal says that the sukkah is actually it's shaped like this. Like it has to be 3 walls, and it's shaped like a hug. It's like Hashem's hug for us. I always think it's like Chag. Chag is holiday. Chag, hug. It's like a divine. But that's it. It's like moving into this divine hug. And I think that it's a reminder for us in our lives, to bring down the physical, not to follow Herod's example, but to follow the example of Freda Eisenman, people like that, people who bring up the ruach, people who emphasize the spiritual aspect of life and not the physical. Okay, so I want to bless all of you Jewish moms with an amazing Shana Tova, amazing New Year, and a wonderful Chag, a Chag full of ruach, full of spirituality, full of spirituality, and that this spirituality and this greater spirit should accompany us this whole year throughout all of 5074. Cult it.